are listening to the Motherhood Experience, a podcast where you are part of the conversation with moms, for moms, and by moms. Let's jump into this episode with me, your host, Val Kleppen. Welcome to the Motherhood Experience podcast. I am so excited to introduce you to our first guest. This woman has been my best friend for the last 30 years. And while we have a lot of stories we could tell, today's episode is only going to be focused on motherhood, and she has had some experience. I'll let her be the one to get into that. But it is with tremendous pleasure that I get to introduce you to my best friend since the 8th grade, Tiffani Asher. We'll head right into that interview right now. Tiffani, I am so glad you could join me for you are my first guest. I don't know if I told you this or not, but I felt like starting the podcast would not be authentic if I didn't have the person on who's known me for 30 years. And
Has it really been that long?
Yeah. But I mean, we met when we were like newborns, right? So we're only 30.
Yeah, that's it. I
That's
think
it.
I've got some lines that prove otherwise, but
Well,
I've earned them, so don't you dare take them from
they're
me.
smile lines from your motherhood experience, right?
That's it.
That's
That
it.
is it. That's
That's
it.
it.
That's where the lines come from.
So tell the rest of the world right now the names and ages of your kids, what stage of motherhood you're in.
Okay. My oldest son is Brooks, and he is married. He is 23. He will be 24 in October. He's married to Summer, and they are expecting their first grandbaby, my first grandbaby, their first child. The grandbaby part's the most important.
Yes.
So they're expecting a baby in December. And then I have a 22-year-old, Ethan. He's my middle kiddo. He still lives at home. And then Peyton is my baby, and she will be 21 the end of September.
You know what's weird for me is hearing their ages said out loud. Like, I know how old they are, but hearing their ages said out loud is really weird for me.
Does it make you feel older?
It doesn't. It just doesn't seem possible. It doesn't make me feel older. It's just like how I still remember these tiny little kids.
Yeah.
And now
Yeah.
Brooks is going to have a tiny little kid of his own.
I know.
Oh gosh. So when we were growing up, and this is hard for me, honestly, because there are so many stories we could tell, but I don't think you and I have ever had really an in-depth conversation just about motherhood. Like
I don't think so either.
We've talked about our kids, of course.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But this is like different conversation territory, I feel like.
Totally.
So
Mm-hmm.
did you always want to be a mom?
No, I did not. But I have to be careful how I say that because I think it offends my children. It's not towards them. I just never thought about it. I remember when we were in high school, even middle school, and we babysat, and a lot of people would babysit other people's kids for money. In my head, there was just never enough money to put up with another person's child. So in my head, I was never like, I can't wait to be a mom. Like it just did not register ever. There was never like I am so excited to have a baby. I just personality wise, I just was not that person.
So
But God knew what he was doing.
that's so interesting to me because share what you want to share here, but you were surprised by motherhood
3 times because birth control does not work for everyone. Yeah, literally we could do this for days, but yeah, we my husband and I he's the only man I've ever been with, and we have been together since the 6th grade. And so we inevitably dated for 8 years before we decided to get married, and things happened. And so I ended up pregnant before we got married and with Brooks, and I was actually a nanny in New York at the time. And then Andy flew out over spring break and we got married. And it just sped things up very quickly. So it was kind of like I think it's a typical small town story that you hear from a lot of girls. Like you think it's not going to happen to you. And when you are in a relationship for that long, it's not good. It's not, I think there's wisdom in short, whether it's courtship or dating or whatever it is that anybody wants to call it. Like, I think you learn more about somebody after you get married, but when you date for 8 years prior to getting married,
Mm.
you kind of know a lot about each other. So we did just kind of speed it up quite a bit. And you already know that story, but
Yeah.
just to share with your viewers too, like it happens. And so then I got pregnant with Brooks when I was 19 and then came back to Wyoming. He flew out to New York. We got married, came back to Wyoming, and I started praying audibly to God daily. Please do not. After so I had delivered Brooks in October, and then I was praying daily, God, please don't let me get pregnant again. I need to just be this right now. And I prayed and I prayed and prayed. And then I was very specific and I prayed, God, please let him be a year old. And so Brooks and Ethan are 20 months apart because God let me be a mother for a year, just like I asked. Be specific. That's my key right there. Be specific. So I had prayed. And so I had Ethan 20 months later after Brooks. And then Ethan was born with cancer. We can get into that later. And so in the midst of all of that, didn't really pray for other children. So I had delivered Ethan in June, and then he was about 6 months old and he started weaning himself off. Now, mind you, I was on birth control every time I got pregnant. And so when I found out I was pregnant with my daughter, Ethan was 6 months old, and I was actually in the doctor's office trying to get on stronger birth control because I was that afraid I was going to get pregnant. And the doctor was like, sorry. So Ethan and Peyton are 15 months apart.
And all
Yeah,
three of your kids are not only close in age, but like today they're close relationally.
they
Like
are. They
having
are.
them that close in age. Did you feel like you grew up with your kids?
Totally. Totally. And I know, like, looking at other mothers now and stuff, because I started at 19, I was a kid myself. I was 20, technically. I was 20 when I had Brooks. And I feel like you don't have the patience when you're young like that. And so I think it was more important to me. Like, I played with my kids all the time because I was young enough and had energy to do so. But also, like, I just didn't know there was another option. I didn't know there was another way to do it. But also, I was we got to go, 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 and we have to do everything and we have to be a part of because I had energy. So I kind of threw my kids into everything for a
Yeah.
little just to keep them busy. And I notice as older friends and stuff that I have that have kids that are my kids' age as we were raising them. I made the joke with a lot of my friends early on that I was raising everyone else's babysitters because I was the first to have all the children.
Yes.
So everybody was years behind me on that. And so in the midst of talking to other mothers and stuff at the time, I think a lot of my closer friends here that we raised our kids together in Powell so I will be 44, and I think my closest friend is 52. So there's an age gap where the wisdom kicks in, and oh, that's why it's smarter to wait.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I wouldn't change any of it. I
Yeah.
truly wouldn't change any of it. I think we had a blast.
Well, and I know like we had a blast watching you raise kids. I think, if that makes sense. Like, because we would always get together,
Yeah.
you were hosting game nights and all this stuff, and we got together and the kids were always there. And so they just kind of were a part of it. Maybe we all grew up with your kids. If you look at it
I would
that
say
way.
so, yeah.
Yeah.
I would definitely say so.
So when you found out that you were pregnant, which is such a funny story, like it's a funny story. You didn't want to babysit, then you ended up being a nanny in another state, and then you ended up pregnant. But like, how did you envision motherhood? And was it was
Okay,
it
so when you say it like that,
I think
I
it's
know
funny.
I never wanted to babysit, and then I went out to be a nanny, and Yeah, I'm a I'm a flight risk. Let's just call it what it is. Like personality, I don't sit well. I'm really good at jumping. I'm really good at jumping, and your introduction in that question totally summed it all up. You are absolutely right. That I had really a vision or expectation or anything when it came to motherhood. I think I was seriously like, what?
This is what we're doing now.
But I think also, so I am the middle child. I've got four siblings. I have two older sisters and two younger brothers. And so, in the midst of being raised in a bigger family, I wouldn't say it was a huge family, but there was a lot of us kids. And
Yeah.
I think in the midst of that, I learned to do so much mothering that, like with my younger brothers, I was babysitting them, when I was 8. Both of my parents had two full-time jobs and they were busy. And so we kind of, from what I remember, of course, when you're the child, it looks like probably way different than the reality of it. But what I remember was that there was a lot of helping each other out. And so when I went off to be a nanny, the little boy that I was a nanny for was 8. And I treated him like a brother and not like a son. Like I didn't care for him like a child. I made him figure out how to do his own laundry, which his mother wanted to kill me for. And I taught him how to make grilled cheese and like brotherly things. And so I think when I had my own kids and I went into the transition from being a nanny into like having my own, a lot of that kind of kicked into to where it was, I'm going to do the best I can in raising you.
Yeah.
I don't know what that looks like. So I'm going to come alongside you and we're going to figure this out together. And I said to Brooks recently, we had a conversation. He's nervous about having this baby and what life is going to look like. And so we're having a conversation about it. And I said, do you remember what I told you in the first grade, son? And he rolled his eyes and he said, yeah, you said, I've never been a parent and you've never been a kid. So we're both just figuring this out as we go. And I was like, exactly. And he remembered it. So I don't know that I had expectations or I don't know. I think I just, and
You
I
just
think I,
you just roll with it. And that's kind of been a grace over your parenting, I think. And we'll get into a little bit of why, because even if you had set an expectation, it would not have gone anything like what you expected or anticipated. And so you had mentioned that Ethan was born with cancer and the Lord ultimately healed him. He had cancer. It was terminal. They saw it. They went in, scheduled an operation, and then went to find it again, and it was
it was
gone.
gone. Mm-hmm.
And so he was kind of always this miracle baby, this miracle child.
Mm-hmm.
And then 5 years ago,
4.
4 years ago,
It'll be 4. Yep. 4
what
years ago.
what happened with Ethan? Like, you don't have to go into the whole thing, but it's just from your perspective as a mother who, you grew up with these kids. You've been through all of these learning experiences with all three of them, so close in age, so close in your age, even. And then this happens. And how did you, as a mother, deal, cope, make it?
So when Ethan, I think I was 20 weeks into my pregnancy when we had the ultrasound to find out about the cancer. So like the whole pregnancy, I was ready for it. When he was 3 days old is when it was gone. And so that was the miracle in that. Um, and then years later, I don't remember if he was 4 or 5. We were sitting at dinner with our whole church. It was a whole church fellowship thing, and we were all hanging out. And Richard Morrow was sitting across the table from me, and he said, he was our pastor's dad. And he said, this little guy has a story, tell me the story. And so I was telling him Ethan's cancer story. And for those of you who have been around church, especially Pentecostals, you'll understand what I mean when I say he got the Holy Wiggles. And so he just kept doing this, like, because he was feeling the spirit, and he was like, so he got the Holy Wiggles, and I started getting nervous, and I started getting scared because I was like, I didn't want to hear what was going to come out of his mouth. But he said, I don't know why or what's going to happen, but I do know that God just told me that he will affect millions before he's done with Ethan. So let's talk about motherhood just for a second. What? Huh? Excuse me? All of those thoughts in my head, like, no pressure? Okay, he's 5. I could royally screw this up. So I think early on, I had to give myself that grace. Like, I have no control. And to have, it's very encouraging to have a prophecy like that over your life, over your child's life. It's very encouraging, but it's also very nerve-wracking all at the same time, the unknown. So he went through life like most children do, very normal. He's very athletic. Someday I will tell his whole story in a book because there's just way too much information to put into this. But his second day of his senior year, he was headed to school and he was in a horrific car accident. It was a single car. He was the only one in the car. There were no other vehicles involved, and he was thrown from the vehicle. He has a severe brain injury. He has, let's see, T9 and T10. His vertebrae popped and severed his spinal cord. And then he had 2 tears in his aorta. And so we got to the hospital, and the ambulance arrived, and they did the best they could to put him together enough to fly him to Billings. And when we got to the helicopter pilot said, "You need to come over and tell him that," which is another story in itself, because I had a 6 months prior to same circumstance that didn't turn out the same. But we're not getting into that. Mm-hmm. So in that moment, my family, the 4 of us, Andy, Brooks, and myself, went to the helicopter and laid hands on Ethan and just told him that we loved him. And then we all got in the car to get to Billings because they had to life flight him to Billings. And, we got to about Franny. You'll know where that is. We got to about Franny, about 15 miles, 20 miles. I don't know how far that is.
Yeah,
20?
I think 15 sounds right. 18. We'll say okay. 18. We'll split the difference.
18 miles. Let's compromise. About 18 miles away, we were driving in the car, and there was just this peace that fell over the car because we all remembered the prophecy. And so when you hit a moment in your life that God just, like, a lot of people say swing doors open, to me it was this huge brick wall that just abruptly went up in front of my face, stopped everything. Like, everything in life was different, and it just stopped everything in that moment. And we learned to, as a family, trust and just have peace and have grace for each other, but really just, like, we are completely and totally out of control here. But we know who the God is that we serve, and we know that he always keeps his promises. And so waiting for that and just to see what God was going to do in the midst of that was more, I think it was a learning experience for all of us, but I think grace kicks in a way of giving each other that leadway and letting each other deal with whatever this looks like for each person. Because my kids are very close in age, and they all were in high school together. And Brooks was out of the house at this point. He had already graduated, and Peyton was a junior. And they were super tight, super close. He actually left her that morning. She was supposed to ride in with him, but he left her because God is amazing. And just little things like that. And so just, like, recognizing and realizing each one of us are dealing with this at a different level, at a different pace, at a different everything, just kind of gives you that grace to get through it, to survive it. And ultimately the first, 6 months, I bet it was 6 months, was just literally getting through it. Mm-hmm. Just surviving it, and one step at a time.
Mm-hmm. And I remember you saying, like, the next morning, the doctor walked in and said nothing at first, and then said, maybe we should come up with a treatment plan, because they did not expect him to survive through the night. And so you, as a mom standing in the gap for your son, to hear the doctor say that the next morning, what was the first thing that went through your head when you were like, he's alive and he's not supposed to be?
I think I went back to those days when I was pregnant with Ethan, and we went to do ultrasound after ultrasound. And my expectation when we were dealing with him carrying a tumor while in utero, every single time we went to get an ultrasound, I would say to my husband, "Today's the day God's going to perform a miracle. today's the day. Today's the day. Today, it's all going to go away. Today's the day. And I think the day that because we didn't leave Ethan that night. Once they brought him back to the recovery room, we're in the room with him. So when the doctor came the next morning and said, we need to come up with a plan, Andy and I just kind of looked at each other like, huh? This isn't part of the plan? Like the plan's not in motion? But both of us, I think, just had this piece about it. Like, yeah, we'll see what God's going to do here. It was never like I won't say never. In those moments, it was very, the hardest thing to hear, which I had to record it that day because I knew that I wouldn't be able to remember everything that was said medically because there was so much wrong. But when he said the spinal cord is severed, he will never walk again. And the spinal fluid is leaking so rapidly out of his spine that his brain is starting to sink into his skull, which means it's deprived of oxygen. And so he's like, there's so much going on that we need to get in there and tie off the spinal cord. And Andy and I both were like, I wonder if he'll walk again. Never in our minds did we ever think for 2 seconds, like, this is it. This is, and I do think it's because of the prayers on the way up and bonding together as a family and just like really recognizing God is not done with him. Whatever comes out of this, God is not done. And so where do we sit with that and how do we get through this together? And so listening to the doctor come in and say, I don't know what to do because we have to get him into surgery, but we can't because the swelling is we can't get him into the MRI machine because the swelling, we can't they couldn't do so many things that it just got to where it was like having that peace that passes all understanding. God is just going to perform and we don't know what that means, but he will show up and we get to be front row for the whole thing.
So let's not keep the listeners in suspense then. Today, Ethan, give us an update on Ethan today.
Okay. Ethan is doing very well. Ethan is he's doing very well. He's in therapies. He's walking in the pool. He has no feeling from his rib cage down. No motion. In the past 3 years, he has slowly regained bits and pieces of things. More was wrong than they had initially anticipated. So he also has 2 avulsions in his spinal cord where his right hand does not work. His right hand is non-functioning. And so he has 1 limb left, which Ethan has really cool stories to tell about that, but he's doing phenomenal, honestly. His brain injury is severe. It was severe. He has healed a lot from it, but there's still things that happen. One side of his brain, the right side of his brain, looks like an ice cream scoop was taken out. Like there's a lot of matter that's missing, and what goes in that, I don't know. But I know that God created the brain to be a multi-functioning. So a lot of the things that he's lacking, he's just learning to redirect. His skull was, because of the accident, his skull was locked together. So we did some therapies and stuff to open that up, and that has helped tremendously. As you grow, like you still are supposed to have that. That's why babies have the soft spot, but his had locked like that. And so they were able to pull through massage. She was able to pull it about, and it was just more of giving more space, I guess you could say. Like, I don't know how significant, but we could tell a difference even in that kind of stuff. He has very little pain. He's on very little medication. He's very independent in lots of ways. He showers himself. He does his own programs. He does dresses himself. He can cook a few things. We're working on that. He's very independent. He has not chosen to drive just yet. He's not a fear of driving, but more his brain is just not quite there. He's not able to do dual attention very good, and he's not very speedy with thought. And so those 2 things kind of hold him back a little bit to where he's not quite ready to drive. And I think once he gets to that point, independence will be like, there's a lot of things he does completely on his own. Driving just isn't one of those. So he is doing phenomenal.
Yes.
Truly.
Yes. Which, I mean, going back to the expectations of motherhood, you have kids in their 20s and you probably never anticipated to still have one at home right now in this season and be his caretaker, even though he is,
Oh,
gaining independence.
nice.
So what perspective has that given you in motherhood at this stage of life for yourself?
Um,
Especially, I'm going to interrupt and make the question even longer, especially as you are entering the stage into becoming a first-time grandmother. And so kind of these levels of motherhood are overlapping. What does that look like for you?
it's kind of surreal. So we learned a lot being in the hospital as long as we were. We were in the hospital for 4 months solid. In the midst of all of that, they taught us a lot about what the brain looks like when it does recover. And so with the injury level that he had and the brain injury itself, like he basically went back to infancy. And so when your brain takes impact and it has that much injury, all of your wires are no longer connecting where they're supposed to. So everything is just like, it's like throwing a bowl of spaghetti in the air, not even like dropping it on the ground, but like throwing it in the air and things trying to figure out where they belong. And so much of his brain was like that. And they told us from the very beginning, like he could get very angry. He could be very vulgar. He could be like, the brain is so unique in so many ways. And, God just gave me this peace of mind from early on. And he just kept reminding me over and over again, out of the mouth, the heart speaks. Out of the mouth, the heart speaks. And so with Ethan, we never had anger, ever. He was never vulgar. He was never rude. If anything, he was like super, super kind, to where all of the nurses wanted him as a patient. When we got down to Craig, all of the techs like requested him. He had a list of requests, people who wanted to work with him. Like every time somebody lifted him into the chair and he slid a little to the left, he would be like, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. And they're going, you can't control it. Like it's really okay. Just like, so out of the mouth, the heart speaks was huge for us. But it totally was start from infancy and start over. He was awake, probably 2 weeks, maybe. Yeah, it was about 2 weeks before the first time he smiled and laughed. And it was a video that went up on Facebook. You can totally go see it because it's still up there, but he was telling Peyton this joke about potluck.
I
And it was
remember
literally
this.
like talking to a fourth grader. Like there was nothing funny about it. Totally just kept saying potluck. He tried to tell a joke and it was like there was a man at a potluck and he talked really slow. And so it was literally, we've gone through the different stages of life all over again. So as a
Yeah.
mother, from a mother's perspective, just interesting. I just, rolled with it.
I feel like it's funny to me how you and I have been friends for so long, and I know that like you parent so differently from your own parents. How you were parented, you parent so differently from how your siblings parent. You and I parent so differently, but I think that looking at you know here's what I'm getting at. Let me start over and speak in a complete sentence. Did you get a lot of the time after Ethan's accident or even after his cancer diagnosis, did you hear a lot of the time from other people and other parents, like, I don't know how you do it. I don't know
Still.
how you do it. And did you feel like, really, I'm looking for some validation here for myself, but did you feel like answering them like, I don't have a choice?
That is my husband's answer. Every time he's asked that, that's exactly what I said. So then what did you expect me to do?
Yeah.
My answer is a little different. We're all fighting a battle. They just have different titles.
Hmm.
And we raise children differently because we are not the same person. You and I are very different in so many ways, and
I
we are
was
very
just,
much the same in
I
so
was
many ways.
wondering, like, before this interview and calculating how long we had been friends, I was like, our list of things that we have in common is actually very short.
Right.
But
That's why we love each other so much.
we, it must be because we have been such good friends for so long. And I mean, a whole other episode could be devoted to how I wouldn't have made it through a certain part of my life without you. But it's interesting to me your perspective on how, like, how you do it, because I know that you would hear that from other parents. Like, I just don't know how you
Mhm.
do it. I just don't know. And probably still today, you're hearing that some.
A little bit. I think going through trauma, we'll just title it really big,
Yeah.
trauma.
Yeah.
Going through any sort of trauma, I think that people look for connection. And I think so often we either get offended or offended is a huge one. We get offended or we feel sorry for ourselves or we like, there's so many emotions that come into that when people try to relate and try to connect. And so I think for me, it was more a matter of, which I do hear that, like I still hear that from people when they'll see. So we were at a football game and Ethan fell out of his chair. And I am not a typical mother. So every time my son falls out of his chair, I laugh hysterically, like to the point where I think I'm going to pee my pants. I laugh. It is embarrassing for everybody around me, and I'm fully aware of it, but I'm not taking that on like it's something wrong with me. There's probably something very wrong with me, but that's not really the point. Like, that's just how I deal with it. Apparently,
Yeah.
the damage is done. He's okay. He's not hurt. But he's on the floor. How the crap am I going to get him up? You know, like my head just goes, this is comical. This is hysterical. So even in things like that, and at those moments, I have a lot of people that say things like, I don't know how you do this, or I don't know how you, whatever. And my response is usually the same. You'd be surprised. They're going through similar things. It just has a different title. So their son's not in a wheelchair, but maybe their son's battling depression. It's
Yeah.
still trauma. It's still something we deal with. It just has a different title. And to give each other that grace as well, to just do this the best way that you know how to do this and survive it. It's
So
not
that's a really great segue, and I think I have to reword my final question for you as we wrap up here, because I think you just answered what I was going to ask. So I'll change it and say, to your daughter-in-law who is going to enter into motherhood for the first time, given your 23 and a little bit years of experience of motherhood, what would you tell her to encourage her? Because you know that we have no control over what does or doesn't happen. You know that no matter what you expect, it doesn't go that way. But also you know the trials, you know the struggles, but you know the blessing and you know the reward of being a mother. So what would you tell her as she is about to enter into motherhood right now?
slow down,
Hmm.
slow down.
In
You
every way.
just think that things are so much more important than they are.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good.
Slow down. Because ah,
That's my job.
when we when we get too caught up in ourselves, when we get too caught up in what people expect, we just get so busy. We get so like, slow down, slow everything down, slow your brain function down, slow your moments down, like slow down. Because I think when we can slow down long enough to go, ultimately, does this matter? It changes the way that we answer things. It changes how we view things. It changes what we have time for. All of the little things. You enjoy the little things so much more when you recognize them as they're little things, just little things. And you can do this. We can all do this. Like,
Yeah.
it's much easier with God. I will throw that in. Much easier with God at your back and having God face your battles for you and walk you through it and guide you through it. But just slow down. And I think ultimately, through everything that we've gone through with Ethan, ultimately that is our biggest takeaway. Because with him, we had to slow way down.
Yeah.
And so much more meaning has come out of it, and so much more power has come out of it that it's worth it. It's worth it. It's worth repeating the same conversation 175 times. It's worth it. And in the moment, you're like, I'm going to pull my hair out. But
Yeah.
then you look back on it the end of the day and he's asleep in his bed and he's not anywhere else. Like, he's here. And at the end of the day, it's funny that he asked me the same question 175 times, exact same question. And I answered it all 175 times. It's funny. It's a little moment. Does he do that now? No. but he did for a very long time. In the moment, you just get so caught up in like, I can't get past this. I can't move forward. I can't. So I think that would be my biggest one. And Summer and I have had that conversation multiple times. Slow down. Just slow down.
That was so good. So good. And I could feel myself even breathing deeper and easier as you were saying it. It's such a good reminder for all of us as moms. And I love you so much.
I love you too.
I cannot think of a better first guest to have on my podcast, brand spanking new podcast, because you've been through some stuff, Mama.
A little.
You've been through
I'm so excited for you. This will be so great.
Thank you.
You can have me back anytime.
Well, we're going to have to, because there's so much that we didn't cover. So sure. Everybody can stay tuned, like every season or something. You'll just have to be my season opener.
Yeah, I kind of like it. We'll call it a special. We'll think of something.
Oh, all right. Well, love you, friend. Thank you for being a guest, and we'll catch you later.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode of the Motherhood Experience podcast. To join our exclusive TME community, head on over to themotherhoodexperience.com/learn more. Be sure to follow the Motherhood Experience on Facebook and Instagram, and please leave us a 5-star review wherever you listen to podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube, leave us a comment below, and we'll catch you next time.